Spider-Man may be sticking around the MCU for one more solo film and one more team-up, but that may not be a permanent situation. As we all know, Sony has its own Marvel-based universe, the Sony Universe of Marvel characters, or Sony's Marvel Universe. This SMU is based largely upon Spider-Man related characters, such as perhaps the most popular and memorable of his villains, Venom. So of course Sony wants to find a way to combine their SMU with the highly successful and wildly popular Spider-Man series they've got going on now. Impossible, you might be thinking. Spider-Man is in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that is not connected to the SMU. Well, dear viewer, what if I told you there was a way that Spider-Man may join the SMU? And I mean this version of Spider-Man, the Tom Holland Spider-Man. Keep on watching and we will look at how a mystical web connecting different worlds across the multiverse would allow this to happen, and how Into the Spider-Verse may have predicted the future of the MCU's Peter Parker. Way back in the 90s, Marvel wasn't the financial juggernaut that it is today. Nope, not even close. In fact, they were on the verge of bankruptcy. So in order to make some quick scratch and keep going for a little while longer, the company decided to offer up some of their most popular characters to several major movie studios. The idea was that the studios would be able to use the characters in their own films, and in exchange, Marvel would get some cash money, and of course additional interest in the properties that the films might drum up, hopefully increasing comic and merchandising sales. And it basically worked, especially with the Fox X-Men films and the Sony Spider-Man trilogy. However, shortly after the turn of the millennium, Marvel wanted to start making their own films. And because of their earlier deals, they were forced to utilize some of their B-team heroes, such as Iron Man. Yes, Iron Man was a B-level hero at the time. Bit unbelievable today, but a true story. And so, in the earlier days of the MCU, Marvel was missing its most popular and iconic hero, Spider-Man. Spider-Man not being in the MCU would be like Superman not being in the Justice League. Could have happened, but something definitely would have been missing. So when he properly joined in Captain America Civil War, the deal between Sony and Disney that allowed it all to happen was heralded as an incredible thing for movie fans everywhere. And Tom Holland's version of Peter Parker has received nothing but positive reactions, with many considering him the best version of the character to have ever hit the big screen. Meanwhile, Sony was toying with the idea of launching their own film universe, focused around other Spider-Man related characters that they own the rights to. The first of these films, Venom, hit theaters in 2018 and was relatively successful, leading to a sequel being greenlit, as well as the first connected film, Morbius. While Venom did a pretty good job of adapting Venom's origin to remove references to the webhead, it was obvious that Sony would like to add Spider-Man to the franchise. And with the latest version of the Disney and Sony deal, we may have a few ways that that might just happen. The first and most commonly discussed idea is that the SMU films could merely be considered as adjuncts to the larger MCU. Like the Netflix Marvel shows, or really any of Marvel Television's properties, the SMU films could take place within the MCU, featuring nods and references to the parent franchise, while never really affecting those films. That way, Spider-Man could appear in Spider-Man 3 and any future Avengers film, then just swing on over to San Francisco to hang out with Eddie Brock in Venom 2, 3, or whatever. This is an idea that the producer of Spider-Man Homecoming and Venom, Amy Pascal, had previously mentioned, stating that there was really no reason why Venom couldn't be considered tangentially part of the MCU, except for the fact that Disney and Marvel aren't exactly fans of this idea. At least they weren't in the past. And it raises a few questions, like why Venom contained no mention of Ant-Man and his compatriots. If the film is supposed to be in the MCU, and it takes place in the same city as the tiniest Avenger, certainly there would be some overlap there. San Francisco being the stomping grounds for two major superheroes would lead to some interesting encounters between the two. Of course, this could be explained away in a couple of ways. The meta explanation is that, obviously at the time, neither studio could have had the rights to reference the other. You could also go with an in-universe explanation. Since Venom largely takes place over a day or two, the events of that film could have just happened before Scott Lang or his friends heard about it. By the time they found out about a gooey alien running around eating people, the movie was already over. Or it was during the blip, let's go with that. Which brings us over to number 2. The idea that Spider-Man could hop across the multiverse and find himself in Venom's universe. This is actually kind of an offshoot of the adjunct idea, as this would mean that the SMU films do exist in the MCU technically, but on another version of Earth. Phase 4 does seem to have a much larger emphasis on expanding the universe into the multiverse. Heck, the second solo Doctor Strange film is in of itself a major leap into the idea of the multiverse. The film is titled Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, so that's pretty blatant if you ask us. So the MCU is laying the groundwork for multiple different universes, each one different from the others. So who is to say that one of those different universes isn't the one where Venom and Morbius and all of them exist? So the SMU could be part of the MCU, just not the main universe. Sony, for their part, has also been doing some setup to prepare audiences for the idea of heroes traversing the multiverse. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which hit theaters not too long after Venom, saw Miles Morales' Spider-Man going on an adventure with different versions of Spider-Man from across the multiverse, each brought together due to a massive sci-fi MacGuffin built by Kingpin and Dr. Olivia Octavius. The film was loosely based upon the Spider-Verse event in the comics, which saw numerous different Spider-Man-esque heroes from all across the multiverse coming together to stop a shared threat. This even was followed up by a direct sequel, known as Spider-Geddon, which introduced a rather interesting idea. The web of life and destiny is a sort of extra-dimensional construct that serves as a sort of blueprint for the different realities, which explains why similar events tend to happen on the different versions of Earth, just in slightly different ways. It also allows for travel across the multiverse, specifically for beings known as totemic deities, or spider totems. So basically, the web connects all versions of Spider-Man, Spider-Woman, Spider-Ham, etc. This connection to the web within the comics grants Spider-Man a sort of unique ability, as he's able to travel to different Earths. This is something that Marvel Studio head Kevin Feige may have been hinting at when he recently mentioned that Spider-Man had the ability to cross universes. So maybe Sony and Disney have come to an agreement that will allow Tom Holland's Spider-Man to travel between the MCU and the SMU, and Sony seems to be setting this idea up even further. It was announced not that long ago that Sony was looking to develop a film around the rather obscure character Madame Web. Now, on the surface, Madame Web would seem like an odd character to make a film centered around. She is a powerful psychic, but she's also blind and confined to a chair due to a neurological condition. Wouldn't seem to really make for the most action-packed film. However, Madame Web has a rather unique ability, in that she can sense the spider totems from across the multiverse, and in a way serves as a conduit for the web of life and destiny. So maybe Madame Web will serve as the means by which Peter Parker will be able to traverse between the MCU and the SMU. Could make for a rather interesting idea, all things considered. And maybe that could lead to an even bigger live-action team-up between multiple versions of the Webhead, a live-action Spider-Verse. How cool would it be to see Tom Holland, Tobey Maguire, and Andrew Garfield all together in a film? Maybe throw in Nick Cage as Spider-Man Noir, Emma Stone as a live-action Spider-Gwen, and heck, maybe even Donald Glover as an older Miles Morales, since there was such a large push by fans to get him to play the role a few years ago. That all could be pretty sweet. We'd watch it, and you know that you would too. Of course, the third and final way that Spider-Man could appear in the SMU is one that we don't necessarily want to see, but it is definitely a possibility. And that is that maybe Spider-Man will be written out of the MCU once Spider-Man 3 and the final agreed upon team-up film are finished with, paving the way for a new version of the character to debut in the SMU. Spider-Man 3 could wrap up the character's individual story, dealing with the fallout from the end of Far From Home, where J. Jonah Jameson revealed Spider-Man's identity to the world, along with a video from Mysterio that made it look like he was a homicidal maniac. Then the unthinkable could happen. Perhaps in Avengers 5, Spider-Man could truly follow in his former mentor and father figure's footsteps, making the ultimate sacrifice in order to beat the big baddie, ultimately ending Spider-Man's story in the MCU. Though honestly, we really don't think that Disney or Marvel would want to take out Spider-Man, especially the younger, child version of Spider-Man that they've created for the MCU. Some of us here at Screen Rant think that, instead, they may do something that'll be more of a combination of the third and second option. If they do have to remove Spider-Man from the MCU entirely, maybe they'll instead trap him onto another world within the multiverse. Picture this. Maybe Scarlet Witch, as we outlined in our theory about Wanda Maximoff being the next big MCU threat, does some reality warping shenanigans that'll tear holes in the fabric of the multiverse. So maybe while trying to deal with the situation alongside the Avengers, Peter Parker will find himself flung out across the vast abyss and wind up trapped on a different Earth. Venom's Earth. Sure, we would prefer if he could just travel back and forth between the two universes at will, but studio politics may not allow for that, so this may be the best option. And that is how we think Spider-Man will join the SMU. What did you think of this theory? Do you think we will see Tom Holland in the SMU? Or will the end of his time in the MCU be the end of that version of the character? Do you think the SMU Spider-Man will instead be Miles Morales? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and while you're down there, consider subscribing for more awesome videos just like this one. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you at the movies.